UK Prime Minister Tony Blair are pushing for governments to have a stricter approach.
I just think we've got to be careful as we open up. COVID's not over. We're going to have to live with COVID for a long time to come. The key thing is to draw a clear distinction between people who are vaccinated and people who aren't.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ruled out mandatory vaccines. She hopes more people will choose freely to get the jab so life can continue returning to normal across Europe.
And for more now, I want to bring in healthcare analyst Dr. John Campbell. He joins me tonight from Carlisle in the UK. Dr. Campbell, it's good to see you again. Let's start with France and Greece. They are making coronavirus vaccinations mandatory for all healthcare workers. Talk to me about why this is necessary.
Well, because these patients are at risk and healthcare workers can pass the virus on to their patients. And we now know quite definitively from data in the UK that people that are vaccinated are 50% less likely to get the virus in the first place. And if they do get it, they're 50% less likely to pass it on. So we're talking about a 75% level of protection here. So there's a pretty good medical rationale for this.
Dr. Fauci, it's Andrew. A behavioral science question of sorts. How concerned are you and how concerned is the administration effectively that engaging in a conversation about boosters makes it even less attractive for those who have yet to take the first shot of the vaccine, that they won't want to take it at all because they're going to say that either it is not effective or they're going to say, I'm not only in for one shot or two, I may be in for three, and maybe I'm going to be even in for more over time?
Okay, so that's really a great question, and it allows me to make a point that we really need to clarify. When you're talking about a booster, namely a third shot in a two-shot regimen, what we're discussing now, or a booster following a single shot of J&J, this has absolutely nothing to do with the effectiveness of the vaccine. These vaccines are highly, highly effective.
Right now, there's one thing all 8 billion of us on Earth wish for: a vaccine for COVID-19. Around the world, political leaders, sweating on getting us to the other side of the pandemic, promise it'll happen within 12 to 18 months. But hang on a minute, vaccines normally take decades to formulate, and quite often success never comes. So why should we be so optimistic now? As Liam Bartlett finds out, some scientists say talk of a coronavirus vaccine is not only raising false hope, it's fake news.
A safe vaccine, available to all, affordable to all.
It's the great hope galvanising the world. A vaccine for COVID-19.
It's humanity against the virus.
We can't get back to full normal until we develop vaccines.
For a planet and its population in lockdown, it's our one sure way back to normal.
Our best and brightest medical minds and researchers are working tirelessly.
But are we being sold a lie? After all, COVID-19 is the 7th coronavirus to strike mankind, and we've never found a vaccine for any of them.
We are very confident that we're going to have a vaccine at the end of the year.
To quote a famous president, it's fake news. The shortest time anybody's ever found a vaccine against any disease that I'm familiar with is about 7 years. The average time is 20. To be talking about a magic bullet coming in months it borders on the absurd. One of the best places.
Professor Arthur Kaplan is Director of Medical Ethics at New York University.
I'm not saying don't spend the money. I'm not saying don't do the research. But we can't plan public policy on a miracle.
Right now, there are about 100 medical teams around the world, including Australia, chasing that miracle, the holy grail of a COVID vaccine. Surely one of them will find it.
Look, viruses are very clever. We have no AIDS vaccine right now. We've been looking for that for more than 25 years. There's no vaccine for hepatitis C. Even the flu vaccine we've got, which we've been working on for decades, is about 40% effective in a good year. There's no guarantee we will find something to beat this virus. But the idea that just because a lot of teams work on this, it's going to give somebody the breakthrough, that doesn't follow.
I command all those assembled to leave the area immediately.
This is what a Monday night in Seattle has looked like lately. Seattle wasn't home to any of the high-profile police killings that rocked the country this year, but it has been home to some of the most intense demonstrations. In June, protesters took over part of the Capitol Hill neighborhood after police abandoned their precinct. It ended 3 weeks later after 2 black men were shot to death. Then, in November, the city council reduced the police budget for the first time in decades, cutting it by 20%. But 7 months of street action has taken its toll. A majority of residents say they don't support calls to defund the police, and they worry the city is becoming less safe.
This block right here is where all the interaction between SPD and the rioters were. I want my city back.
Victoria Beach is one of them. She's a longtime advocate of police reform, and she runs a citizens advisory group, which brings black residents together with cops to hash out their differences.
What was it like to live here during all
Hell. You know, the constant sound of helicopters, I mean, all the time, sirens, them marching, it was just no rest. Our neighborhood was tore up, and I feel like for no good reason.
How do you feel about where things ended up, the 20% reduction?
We have to not defund the police, we need reform.
In New York City, and I happen to represent the Bronx, I have Rikers Island here in my own district. And the New York City Police Department has a $6 billion a year budget. That is more than we spend on youth, housing, healthcare, and homelessness combined in New York City. And so the problem is not a lack of resources here. In fact, many folks here in our community say that the problem is the opposite, is that not enough resources are being put into the very kinds of social programming and investments that prevent crime and social discord in the first place. And so what a lot of folks are talking about when it comes into this movement is that they're asking for the same budget priorities that many affluent suburbs already have. And it may sound strange, but many affluent suburbs have essentially already begun pursuing a defunding of the police, in that they fund schools, they fund housing, and they fund healthcare more as their number one priorities.
But why is it necessary to take the money from the police? I mean, I understand your argument, the argument you're making about expanding social services, investing in social services, but the research does show that more police on the street means less crime.
Well, I think there's one question that is interesting here is that when it comes to funds, it's not always just about the number of officers in the street. It's about these police precincts that have tanks, that have military weaponry, and frankly have a degree of material resources and warlike weaponry that people ask, why does a local police precinct have this in the first place?
As thousands call for defunding police, Dallas has a big problem.
No justice, no peace.
Crime is way up.
This year alone, we are up 26% in drug offenses. We are up 23% in weapons violations. We're up 31% in aggravated assault. And that's on top of the 25% increase we saw in 2019.
Due to the large increase in crime, city leaders have talked for months about their hope to hire hundreds more Dallas police officers. Now there are calls from the community to redirect some of the department's budget.
I don't agree with defunding the police department.
Chief Hall said nearly 90% of the police budget is personnel. So if the city cuts the police budget, she said not only will they not add officers, they will lose officers in a city with rising crime.
Defunding the police department means keeping the right to safety and protection away from our tax-paying citizens.
Crime is going to happen. Who do we want to come to us when we are victimized?
Alex Picaro is a criminologist at the University of Texas at Dallas. He doesn't think the city will cut police, but he thinks roles may change.
And so I think that we need to think very careful about what we want the police to do. And that's where we should start. We should start with, well, what do we want the police to do? What does that look like?
They ask us to look at investing more in the community.
Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins released a proposal based on ideas from community leaders, a proposal hoping to bring down crime and change policing.
The point that they're making is we've got to invest in social work, benefits, and mental health. And we've got to radically transform the way we go about policing so that every 10-year-old child who's black or brown is not having a conversation about how to survive a routine interaction with the police.
No matter what the future holds, Dallas has a dilemma. How do you reimagine public safety in a city with rising crime? In Dallas, I'm Alex Rosie.
You may have heard the kids are getting radical, at least compared to older voters. Among Americans 18 to 34, socialism is viewed more positively than capitalism. In the 2020 presidential election, 54% of Democratic voters under 30 back Bernie Sanders, a Democratic socialist. Sanders won 65% of voters under 30 in the Nevada caucuses.
Thank you!
Why are you a socialist?
You know, I'm originally from West Virginia, and so every time I go home, you see the trees are gone. Coal dust covers the roads, but no one's life is improving there.
Connor McClellan co-founded a Young Democratic Socialists for America chapter at East Tennessee State University in September 2018. Connor and 11 other members of the group road-tripped 14 hours from Johnson City, Tennessee for a 3-day conference.
Hello, everyone. This is Connor McClellan. We're passing through Indianapolis, and we're excited to be in Chicago.
You don't expect a bunch of young socialists to be in the middle of Tennessee, but I think we're one of the biggest political clubs on campus.
275 college and high school students gathered in Chicago to learn how to be better organizers for democratic socialism and for Bernie Sanders.
So this is a little Yolidarity. It's about Southern socialism. So this is to raise awareness that, there are leftist movements in red states.
The conference is run by Democratic Socialists of America, which has been around since the early 1980s.
When we fight, we win! When we fight, we win!
But there was a surge in interest after the 2016 election, and in the last 3 years, membership has more than doubled from 24,000 people to 56,000.
Socialism.
Socialism.
Workers to power!
Socialism?
We are fighting to put more power in the hands of everyday working Americans.
Socialism.
Before it became a dirty word, socialism was relatively popular in the United States. So what happened?
Socialism can refer to a whole bunch of economic and political philosophies based around the idea that communities should either own or regulate the means of production. The means of production being the facilities and resources, from raw materials to tools and factories, used to create wealth. Principles of socialist societies had already been adopted in America by some religious communities like the Amish and Shakers in the early 19th century. Socialism was eventually championed by American labor activists in the late 19th century as part of a new political movement. That was largely thanks to German economists and writers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and their theories about class struggle in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. They applied socialist theory to a vision of communist society. The short version of their vision is, in rebellion against industrial injustice and labor exploitation, the working class should have a revolution, taking property and money away from wealthy, greedy business owners and sharing it with the entire community. The long version is, well, very long. But the point is, it caught on in America, sparking a long tradition of socialism and socialist thought.
2 surveys reported from the Washington Times and Federalist revealed that more than 50% of millennials identify as socialists, ranging from a slight preference to a more radical breed. A prime example is this clip from the 2019 Democratic Socialists of America Convention, or DSA.
If we want to defeat capitalism, we are going to need a party that will organize working people to fight for the demands that we want and to win socialism. Thank you so much.
Quick point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronoun?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
A bit silly, but the trending direction of Millennial and Generation Z's ideology is no laughing matter. The spread of hyper-intersectionality and democratic socialism is having several adverse effects on politics, academia, and most importantly, the fabric of American civility.
You like being able to speak your mind freely or practice whatever religion you want? People in America take these rights for granted, but these rights only exist because of the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. America is the most free and most prosperous country in the world. But why is America different, and why should we preserve these values? Let's take a look. 1. The First Amendment protects the free exercise of religion. If you are a Muslim, a Christian, an atheist, you can freely practice your beliefs in America. The founders did not believe that religion should be divorced from politics, but they prohibited the government from establishing a national church. You see, liberty can only be kept if Americans remain a good and moral people, and the Constitution promotes the free exercise of religion. It doesn't eliminate religion. 2. Freedom of speech is one of the most important rights in our Constitution. It allows Americans to speak their opinions without fear of punishment or regulation. This means the First Amendment not only protects speech that is widely accepted, it also protects speech that isn't popular. In fact, freedom of speech would be meaningless if it only protected speech that we all liked. 3. I'm sure you've heard all about fake news in the media recently, but what if that fake news was coming directly from your government? This is why we have a free and independent press. The press searches for truth and promotes virtue and unity. The press is also a check on the government and helps to advance American values. 4. The First Amendment also protects the right for people to gather peacefully. It guarantees the right for citizens to petition the government to protest or give an opinion on an issue. So all these people you see marching in the streets with picket signs for God knows what are only able to do so because of the First Amendment.
Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Sophie. What are we going to talk about today? Are we going to talk about why I'm not a feminist anymore? Are we talking about why I'm just not a feminist, but actually an anti-feminist person, woman? Why I don't like feminism? I don't think feminism is good for women. I think they are extremely unrealistic, and I don't think they value women for what women have to offer. The only way feminists value women is if they act like men. You only hear them talk about how many women are CEOs, how many women are having top positions, and that this is a clear sign that women are not valued in our society. You know what it's like to have those kind of jobs? Do you think it's nice to have those kind of jobs? Working 60 hours a week or more? For what? For some company? And then you have your fiduciary rights to do good for the shareholders, which are changing all the time. So who the heck are you doing it for? Like, why would that be a meaningful life to you? Feminism is selling us a lie. It's not meaningful or joyful or brings you happiness to work for a corporation and be the CEO and have the power. Well, feminism likes to have the power, so maybe that's where they're coming from, but for most people it's not meaningful. And the men that goes on to have these jobs, they are not doing it for the sake of having the job or being the CEO. At least most of them are not doing it, but They're doing it to support their family the best way they can, to support their kids, to support their wife, to create a good life for their offspring, which is natural. And the best way women can do that is not by taking over the roles of men and making them obsolete and saying, oh, we don't need men. Girl, you're lying.
It goes back to the feminist argument, at least the modern day feminist argument of saying, well, women should be able to do all the things that a man can. And so what they try to do is they try to erase any physical, biological differences between men and women. Of course, we see that in this whole gender fluidity movement, that what does it really mean to be a man and a woman? Well, abortion really plays a part in that.
Right.
Because if a man can physically walk away from a pregnancy, then a feminist would say, well, a woman should be able to physically walk away from a pregnancy too. So rather than rejoicing in the privilege, and to use a leftist word, the true privilege of being able to carry a child, no matter how hard the circumstance is, because I understand circumstances are really hard for women sometimes, but instead of rejoicing in that privilege and that uniqueness of femininity, that uniqueness of being a woman, they want to take it away so they can say, there's really no difference between men and women, and they think that's going to usher in this egalitarian utopia where men and women don't have any differences between them and equality will be achieved. It's not going to happen.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
No, I don't.
Interesting.
I don't.
Very, very
There's
interesting.
a lot of people that want to, and I know you said that you're not either. There's a lot of people who want to reclaim feminism. I don't really see.
Like, let it burn.
Yeah,
right?
just
Where
let
we're
it
at right
die.
now, like, let it burn. I don't
Yeah.
really see what we're fighting for anymore. Like, I get it. Like, the movement had to be started because we actually did not have equality with men. We have equality with men. In most circumstances, we have more than equality with men. It's like plus. We have all of these privileges on top of it. And when I think of feminism today, I think of the Lena Dunham types. Like Lena Dunham out there, she's obviously miserable, right? And she's not shaving her armpits, and she's going out there and saying that this is freedom. It actually, what they identify, what they determine to be freedom, to me looks like misery, right? We don't need men. We don't want men. Actually, you do need men. Like, actually, we cannot pretend physically, like, biology exists. Like, this is not a good platform to have abolished men. Like, we don't want any more men. And the movement has become so radicalized, and the only way for people to actually pull it back is to just let it burn.
President Biden's first executive orders was to allow transgender athletes to participate in girls' sports. Quoting his order, children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. So let's talk about the real-world impact of this action with a track athlete from Danbury, Connecticut, Alana Smith, and Alliance Defending Freedom Legal Counsel, Christiana Holcomb. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start by playing something that your mom, Alana, said about you going into competition under these circumstances. Here's what she said.
Alana and I were talking about what her strategy was going to be for the day, and she looked at me and said, "Mom, it really doesn't matter because I'm running against the boys today. I won't win."
So, Alana, what kind of position does this put you in as a biologically born female athlete?
It's really disappointing because I know that me and all the other biological females work really hard at track practice, and we work hours a day just to shave off tenths of a second for our times, and it's just really disappointing to know who's going to win the race before it even starts.
Going on, the ACLU says this. Their deputy director for transgender justice states that attempt to bar trans girls from sports, regardless of age or of transition, medical intervention, or anything else, with the new federal administration will now be risking lawsuits by the federal government, Justice Department intervention, and the loss of federal funding. So where does the legal fight go here, Christiana?
Well, this order is an irresponsible abuse of power. It is unlawful, and it effectively eviscerates women's sports for young women like Alana. Look, we already know what the impact of these policies are. We've seen it play out in Connecticut, where 2 biological males have swiped 15 women's state championship titles over the course of just a few seasons. So this will have a devastating impact on women's sports if it's allowed to proceed.
Explain to us why you have these views, David, because you have a very deep religious belief.
Well, I do. I don't think there's any big deal here. Most of humanity throughout most of history have believed this, believed it on the basis of scientific evidence, believed it on the basis of How do we assign gender to people? When I use the word gender, I use it in the same as sex, assigned at birth. And yes, you mentioned my religious views. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I believe that God made mankind male and female. And I believe that this is extremely important to us as a nation, as a generation, that we uphold this truth.
But Doctor, can I just say, this truth, whatever you deem to be the truth or whatever, in today's world, this ain't going to change. Right, it's not going to change. You've lost a job over all of this. Why don't you? Let's start with the easiest option first. Why don't you just go, yeah, whatever. You mightn't believe it or not, but why don't you just tick a box and save your job?
Well, first of all, it would be dishonest for me to do that. I would be, and lying is sinful. It would be sinful before God. And secondly, it's the same thing, isn't it? I do not believe it. And if we have no doctors...
Do you medically not believe it?
I medically not believe it. If we have no doctors or nurses with consciences anymore, anything can happen. We have to be allowed to have a conscience when we work as doctors and nurses, even if we disagree with each other on some things.
What about somebody who has had the full transgender surgery and believes that they have changed their sex, maybe from male to female, female to male, and they are living as that person?
They have the right to
Would
tell
you
me
still not call them by the gender that they prefer?
They have the right to call themselves by whichever gender they wish, but as a Christian, I believe that gender is assigned at birth and that God made them male and female and that this cannot be changed.
Monroe, assigned at birth, you were assigned a gender at birth, but you believed that was the wrong gender, right? So Monroe, doctor, is the person she is today, but on, I presume, your birth certificate, it says you are a different gender.
Yes.
Yes. Now, doctor, do you have a problem with that? Monroe is comfortable in her own skin, who she is, what she is. Would you actually say to her, I don't recognise that?
Can I actually just say surgery doesn't actually have a bearing on how far someone is with their transition. You can be trans and have not even transitioned yet, and that's actually the most crucial point.
So the minute
when people
you
are their
decide,
most vulnerable and they need to be believed.
See, more this is where it becomes very complicated, very confusing, and actually I think perhaps makes it easier for the doctor, because he's actually saying if physically you are...
But that is his job to help people, and he's not doing his job by not helping people.
There's never been anybody that I've refused to help, ever, not once.
Well, we're talking potentially, aren't we?
So we have a situation here. Take Facebook, where we have 78 genders now, I'm told. Now, when gender becomes indeterminate, you can have 7 billion genders. Or you can decide, or you can believe that gender is assigned at birth. Now, if gender is assigned at birth, it follows automatically that gender cannot change.
In New Jersey, 2 people were killed and a dozen injured when shots were fired into a large crowd attending a birthday party.
Somebody fired from the woods or came out of the woods, and it's very tragic and devastating for our whole community.
One person has been arrested in what police believe may have been a targeted shooting.
This was a birthday party. A birthday party is supposed to be a joyous event, not a target for those hell-bent on inflicting harm on a community.
New Jersey's governor connected that crime to the wave of gun violence nationwide.
What we saw here in Fairfield is a microcosm of the scale of gun violence we see elsewhere in other communities in our state and across the country.
In North Charleston, South Carolina, a 14-year-old girl was killed and 13 people were wounded when a gunfight broke out at what police say was an illegal concert. No suspects have been apprehended.
I'll say this, individuals were angry at each other, and they didn't care who got hit.
Another gunfight cost 2 people their lives in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it was a very chaotic scene. Officers dealt with a number of people who had been shot and were laying on the ground.
In Columbus, Ohio, police are searching for whoever shot one person dead and seriously wounded several others in a park after midnight. Also in Ohio, police say 3 people were killed and at least 3 wounded in a shooting outside a Youngstown bar. In Orange, California, balloons and toys were offered near the site where a 6-year-old boy was shot in the back as his mother drove him to kindergarten. Police say the killing stemmed from a road rage incident. The family of Aiden Leos is pleading with the public for help in finding the shooter.
She had to hold him while he was dying. No mother should have to go through that.
At least 119 children under the age of 11 have been killed in gun violence so far this year. Experts say the surge in violence is at least partly attributable to a large increase in gun sales. The FBI reports nearly 40 million guns were sold in 2020, breaking all previous records. An analysis by the University of California at Davis says the COVID-19 pandemic worsened structural, economic, and social inequities in American society in ways that contribute to violence. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
And the shooting in Indianapolis is just the latest in a string of mass shootings across America. In Bryan, Texas, last week, a man shot 6 of his co-workers at a cabinet manufacturing business, killing 1, injuring 5 others. He later shot and wounded a state trooper during a pursuit. Also last week in Rock Hill, South Carolina, investigators say a former Atlanta Falcons player shot and killed 6 people, including a doctor, his wife, and 2 young grandkids, and then himself. Last month in Boulder, Colorado, a man opened fire inside a grocery store, killing 10 people. And less than a week before that, here in Metro Atlanta, 8 people were shot and killed at 3 spas. 6 of the victims were Asian women. Today marking 1 month since the spa shootings in Midtown Atlanta and Cherokee County. And now, after spending all this time in the ICU, the sole survivor is out of the hospital and recovering at home.
Mass casualty shootings in public places have occurred regularly in the United States in recent years, prompting action from government. But deaths from mass shootings actually make up a very small percentage of firearm-related deaths in the U.S. So what does firearm violence in the U.S. actually look like? To inform public debate and to help guide legislation on the prevention of firearm-related deaths and injuries, it is instructive to consider the epidemiology of firearm violence over the past decade. The first thing to note is that compared with other nations, the United States is an outlier in mortality from firearm violence. Its rates of firearm homicide and suicide both substantially exceed those for the other industrialized nations in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. This finding is not likely due to a predisposition to violence in the United States, however, because among those same OECD nations, the U.S. ranks near the bottom in its prevalence of self-reported assault. The most recent data available reveal that between 2003 and 2012, more than 300,000 people died from firearm-related injuries in the United States. That's more than the number of U.S. combat-related deaths in World War II, and more than the total death count for all other U.S. wars combined. And while the overall fatality rate from firearm violence remained constant between 2003 and 2012 at almost 10 deaths per 100,000 persons per year, this stability masks a notable divergence. Firearm homicides have decreased since 2006, while suicides have risen by the same amount. Suicide has been the most common form of fatal gun violence over the past 30 years, and in 2012 accounted for 64% of fatal firearm violence. Gun homicide is concentrated to a remarkable degree among black males, especially young black men. In 2012, the gun homicide rate for black males aged 20 to 29 was almost 18 deaths per 100,000 persons, which is 5 times higher than that for Hispanic males and 20 times higher than that for white males. The pattern for firearm homicide among females is similar to that for males, but the rates are lower by a factor of 10. Black females aged 20 to 24 had the highest mortality rate in 2012, with approximately 7.5 deaths per 100,000 persons. The risk of gun suicide, on the other hand, is highest among white males. In 2012, suicide rates for white males peaked at 40 deaths per 100,000 persons among 80 to 84-year-olds, while the rate for Hispanic men was below 15, and that for black men was below 10 per 100,000 persons. Between 1999 and 2012, the death rate due to firearms increased among white males aged 35 to 64 by almost 36%. White females are similarly more prone to firearm suicide than black or Hispanic females, although the number of cases is lower than male cases by a factor of 10. It peaks at 4.5 per 100,000 persons among white women aged 45 to 55.
Chicago, Candace, thanks so much for coming on, is really kind of a case study in what happens when you apply bad policy.
That's absolutely right. And Lori Lightfoot, I mean, she's a disaster. And I think first and foremost, people take a glance at her, and the first thing you think is this is a woman who is an avowed racist. And you might look at that and say, well, that's obvious because she says she doesn't want to speak to any white reporters and only black reporters. But I think actually Lori Lightfoot is abundantly racist towards black Americans, right? So she pretends, don't pay attention to what she's saying, pay attention to what she's doing. She's pretending that she represents black people when she gets in front and says, I only want to speak to black journalists. But that's meant to be a distraction. Actually, look at her track record. Who is it that she's have her policies led to the mass homicide of? Black people. Black people are dying on the streets of Chicago. Black people are the people that are suffering when you know in the first quarter of this year, 34% homicide rate increase. It's black on black crime, and she has seen this through. The more important thing, though, when you showed a clip of her earlier and she started talking about, we need help, we need help. Do you recall, Tucker, a few months ago when I said to you that the entire defund the police movement, the entire purpose behind what the Democrats do, they don't do anything without purpose. They are always taking a part and parcel of a Machiavellian scheme. I said to you, Tucker, that they're going to start requesting, want the streets to get bad enough until they say, we now need federal help. And at that moment, you're going to see them start talking about a federal police. They were going to want to see federal policing happening on the grounds of these inner cities. I believe that has been the long game the Democrats have been playing. This is why they have been undermining the local police at every second, because they are looking to give more power to the federal government. This is what is happening in Biden's America, and I believe that this is just really what we're seeing is just a faster spread toward America shifting towards a federalized police system in this country.
I think that's really smart. I hate to believe, and I remember when you said that, I remember thinking, boy, I hope that's not true, because it's just so awful that you would create chaos. You allow hundreds, thousands of people to die just so you become more powerful. But I think you're absolutely right. So in other words, none of this was accidental. I mean, they knew defunding the police would get a lot of people killed. How could you not know that?
Of course they knew that. And you look around, you have to study history. And that's why I've said, you see them, they're calling themselves socialists, they're hitting the ground, they're demanding socialism. Well, let's actually take a look at what socialism has been around has been around the world, pardon. Socialism has led to the death of 100 million people all across the world. When you look at communist, socialist regimes of the past, this is what you see. The federal government needs more and more power, and they need to make sure that they take it away from local. So they are taking this away from local. So the Democrats put this plan into place, and now it's speeding up. So she's not helpless. She's saying, we need help from the federal government, we need help the federal government, so that eventually people on the streets are going to say, please, anybody help us. And you're going to start to see real crimes from the federal government when they put their boots on the ground and start saying, okay, now we have complete and utter control. It is not chaos. From chaos, dictatorship arises. That is the lesson of human history.